there are times of being uncivil, disrespectful of others. It turns to outright anger and rage. They say there's a thin line, a very thin line between love and hate. The story I share with you now exemplifies that. It's one of the most bizarre stories I have ever covered. When you see the video, you'll certainly understand. Catch this. A man has an affair with a woman. She learns he's married. She gives him the boot. Months later, she gets engaged. He gets enraged, decides he can't have her. No one will. First, he thinks of killing her. Then he decides to hire 2 thugs to throw lye on her face. They do that. They disfigure her. They all get caught. The guy goes to jail, goes to the attic for 14 years, comes out of prison. I do a park bench interview with him. And during the interview, he turns to camera. He says, "Linda, if you're watching right now, I love you. Will you marry me?" She did. They were married 39 years. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Bert and Linda Pugash.
I think we have a good marriage. We have a stable marriage.
Our bonds are probably much stronger than most other couples because of what we did go through.
Why did you marry a man who blinded you, disfigured you so many years ago?
It's something I wanted to do. It's something that was very, very hard for me to come to terms with, to myself. It's very hard to after something like this happens and say, gee, I still care for this man. Here, it's hard to admit it to yourself, let alone the rest of the world. You know, really troubles me that I think people don't like happy endings. They don't like real happy endings.
Not that they don't like them, they can't handle them.
Are you both happy?
I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not?
Sure.
Was it not for all the stuff? You know, you must have been on the air, and I once have heard you, and next thing, you see out there still looking for me.
Thanks, Cupid.
How do you explain that to people? Say these 2 people love one another, they wanted to kill one another.
Well, that was then, and this is now.
So have you forgiven one another for those awful things in the past?
I would say yes.
What's the glue that's held your marriage together all these years?
I guess I'm still obsessed of
And he's still obsessed. We lost Linda a couple of years ago, and I hear from Bert every now and then how much he misses her. Cupid. I've been called a lot of things in my career, but that's the only time I was ever called Cupid. It was, you have to agree, that was a bizarre story. You know, the impact of incivility on our social fabric is significant. There's an annual report put out by Civility in America. 75% of the people surveyed expressed the belief that the erosion of civility has evolved over many, many years and has now reached crisis levels. Civility is an important ideal in the American tradition, and our country was founded on the very ideals of civility, partnership, compromise, and it was that compromise that led to the adoption of our Constitution. You know, Benjamin Franklin, he put it best. He said, "Be civil to all, sociable to many, familiar with few, friend to one, enemy to none." Now, civility comes from the Latin civilis, which means citizen. The Institute for Civility in Government defines it this way: civility is about more than politeness. It's about disagreeing without disrespect, seeking common ground as a starting point for dialogue about differences, and listening past one's preconceptions and teaching others to do the same. In my opinion, and this is the only opinion I'll give you here, I'm not going to get into politics. In my opinion, showing respect to our flag is the very symbol of democracy. Sure, we're all protected by our right for freedom of expression, but kneeling during our national anthem is an affront. It's disrespectful to each and every one of us who are proud to be an American. Let those kneel go to the dozen other countries where such dissent will land them in jail. As a matter of fact, at this very moment, 262 journalists are in prison in 10 countries, repressive governments which will not accept dissent. So when we talk about the media and the importance of media and free speech, keep in mind the fact that other countries do not permit it. Now, I'd like to ask all of you a question. If your bank made a mistake and suddenly you picked up your bank account and you saw you had $100,000 added to it. All right. What would you do? Would you immediately call the bank and do the civil thing and say, hey, guys, you made a mistake? How many would you do that? All right, most of you. How many would think about it for a while and say, let them catch the mistake? Well, I might. Might, for a couple of days. And call them before they catch me. Okay, so that leads me to segue into a story I'm about to tell you. It's about a man I met who lived out everyone's fantasy. He was destitute, he was out of a job, he had no family, so when the bank showed that he had $100,000 next to his paltry $1,100 or $1,200, he actually gave them every opportunity to catch the mistake over a period of a month and a half. When they didn't, he said, what the heck? He took off with the loot. Meet Charlie Walsh. That's not Charlie. There we go. Here's the audio. Have you got Charlie, Ahmad? See, what this happens when we're on live, we have to vamp and do something on television. You know, somehow they get my ear and they say, hey, we don't have your video. Just happened 2 days ago. I'm covering a demonstration in Brooklyn and the audio portion wasn't there. And you take a deep breath inside and you just keep on going. Let's find out if we're going to see Charlie. Ahmad? He's an interesting character. I'd like you to see him. Either yes, no. Should I go on and vamp? Let me talk up a little bit while he's trying to get that going. All right.
Charlie Walsh is back home in Jersey City 5 months after he took off with $100,000, his bank, and a computer error credited to his account. The former Wall Street broker,
lower the volume,
whose job was taken over by a computer several years ago, was arrested in Portland, Oregon, June 23rd. After a couple of cops just happened to test out a new computer in their patrol car. They fed in the license number of his legally parked car, and lo and behold, the electronic wizard told them Charlie was a fugitive. Police recovered $90,000 of the $100,000 Charlie took with him. He spent $6,000 on a car, lived on the remaining $4,000. He lived as frugally on the lam as he had during the entire 54 years of his life.
I just wanted to settle down. I didn't want to blow it on a weekend in Las Vegas or anything like that. I was just looking toward the future.
Although he's been charged with grand larceny, many folks don't look at Charlie as a criminal. Why, they're treating him as a hero of sorts, a guy who is simply a victim of a computer error.
I think we're going to be able to help you. You're going to find there's a lot of good people in Jersey City that sentiment and feel that you might end up on your feet right away and start fresh again.
Charlie is still a celebrity.
Well, your story, that's the story of many people. We always wondered, Charlie, what we would have done, you see, and if we received the money.
I would have did the same thing Charlie did. The only thing is I would have spent a little more time and money in Vegas.
I've never been good at gambling. I just donate my money whenever I gamble. And I knew enough to stay away from the tables in Vegas. I saw too much money going down those little holes there. Not for me.
What would I have done? I would have returned in all probability. I'm Irish and I'm honest.
Charlie, what motivated you to do it?
Well, it just happened at the wrong time because I've been out of work and my savings were just about gone and I owed taxes on the house. Everything was just going down the tubes all at once and you know, it was just like hanging a steak in front of a hungry man. I just couldn't resist. I just grabbed the money and ran.
Why do you think so many people are treating you like a hero?
I don't know. Maybe I lived out a dream that everybody has, a daydream that, you know, if I only had some money, I'd just take off and go and see places I've never seen before and do things I've never done before. Maybe I'm living out everybody else's fantasies.
Did you ever think you'd be done in by a computer again?
No, I didn't. No, not for the third time, no. I feel like a punch card's been folded, spindled, and mutilated.
Charlie Walsh, a very interesting character, and you'll read about it when you see the chapter in the book. He was caught by he got laid off because of replaced by a computer at a financial firm on Wall Street, and then he had a problem where after he was arrested, a computer said that they owed him money when they didn't owe him money, and then finally he got caught because of an onboard computer in the Portland Police Department. It was a new equipment that they had, and they were testing it, and every time they saw an out-of-town plate, they punched it in, and there was Charlie's New Jersey plate, tilt. They got him. The FBI showed up the next day, and he got back, and he was a hero. He was a bit of an introvert, but during this odyssey across country, he became quite the extrovert. And editorials in Jersey City pleaded for the bank to release the charges, which they eventually did because the bank became the villain here. He wasn't John Dillinger. He gave them every chance. He kept going back to the bank, and he said, "You sure that's my balance?" "Yes, Mr. Walsh, that's your balance." And then after a while, he started withdrawing it. And then he went to Barclays, and he converted it into traveler's checks because he knew they could be easily cashed once he got to Vegas without any questions asked. One of the things, he kept going to banks. He wanted to get a safe deposit box, but he had to show identification. And the coolest part of it was one day he returned to his motel, or the hotel, and it was surrounded by police cars. He was petrified. He said, "Okay, I've had it." He laid low for a while. He went back that evening, and he found out they had a luncheon to honor the police chief, and that's why they were all there. But you'll enjoy reading that story about Charlie. At the end, they wanted to make him Grand Marshal of the St. Patrick's Day Parade. So he really was a hero. You know, it's the people who make the news. And I would say, out of the 15,000 stories I've done, there are so many. In the book, I highlight 26 stories out of the 15,000, and about a dozen of the more unique and memorable interviews. People. I've met so many interesting ones over the years. This next one I'm going to tell you about, you probably know the name Abraham Zapruder. Abraham Zapruder is the man who filmed the assassination of President Kennedy. He just happened to be at the right place at the wrong time. He loved the president, and it was an opportunity for him to see him. He had every intention to bring his camera that day. He forgot to bring it, and his assistant said, "Mr. Z, when again you're going to have a chance to see the president? Go home, get your camera." He did, came back, positioned himself on the grassy knoll, and that's where he was taking it against an abutment, which gave him the stability to take the shots. I interviewed Mr. Zapruder in 1966 on the 3rd anniversary of the assassination. Called him from my hotel room, and I was with a mutual radio network at the time, and I requested an interview, and he said, "Mr. Scott, thank you very much, but I just don't do interviews." He was a very shy man. He did not seek publicity. He did not enjoy publicity, and he was really appalled over the fact of the attention that he was getting because of his film. And we chatted for a while. I knew he came from a Russian Jewish immigrant's family, and he originally lived in Brooklyn. So I brought up the subject of New York, that he missed New York, and I engaged him in conversation long enough that we were getting to know one another. He started asking me questions about myself, about reporting, was I married, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We got to know one another. After speaking for 15 minutes, he finally relented. He said, "Okay, can you be here at 2 o'clock?" And I showed up at his office, and I said, "Kind of stuffy in here. How about let's walk downstairs and do it?" And we stood at the exact spot where he shot the film. Now, there was a portion of that interview. When I saw the film, I felt there was a portion of that interview, if I ever could get hold of the film and to be able to use it, I could sync that portion of the interview. I could synchronize it with the film to make it sound like Abraham Zapruder is narrating his film. It took me 40 years to achieve it. And why? Because first, it was owned by Time Life. Then it was owned by the Library of Congress. And then after the government settled with the Zapruder family long after he was gone, they gave them $18 million for that film. They gave the licensing rights to the 6th floor museum in Dealey Plaza. So on the 40th anniversary, back in 2003, I said, what have I got to lose? I spoke to the curator, and basically said, you've got something I want, and I have something I think you will want. And I explained to him the 20-minute interview I had with Abraham Zapruder. They overnighted me the film, and I overnighted them a copy of my audio tape. They went wild. The curator said they learned more from my 23-minute interview with him than anything he had told the Warren Commission or the Clay Shore trial. Because we talked about conspiracy, we talked about a lot of things, and he was very candid with me. So we made a deal. They allowed me to use the film. They were getting licensing rights from networks for like $15,000 or something like that. So they allowed me to use it on WPIX on the 40th anniversary, and I put it together. Interesting, the film runs 26.6 seconds. My interview was a little longer. We're like 33 seconds, little nip and tuck here and tighten some of those pauses, and we made it work. So I have to tell you, what you're going to see, if you haven't seen this film before, it is graphic, but let's take a look at the narrated version of Abraham Zapruder's film of the assassination. No, that's Stephanie. There we go.
The images are seared in America's collective consciousness. Whether you lived through it at the time or are one of the more than 60 million who weren't born in 1963, the visual images of a young president being brutally murdered endure as a deeply personal experience. Abraham Zapruder, a 58-year-old dress manufacturer, forgot to bring his camera that day, but his secretary convinced him to go back home to get it, arguing, when are you going to get another chance to film the president? He checked out 3 spots before finally positioning himself in the lower left corner of this grassy knoll in front of the Texas School Book Depository building. It was a perfect vantage point to film the presidential motorcade.
I saw the motorcycles, then the car approached, and Jacqueline and the president were waving, and as it came in line with my camera, I heard a shot. I saw the president lean over to Jacqueline, then the second shot came. And then I realized, I saw his head open up, and I started yelling, they killed him, they killed him. And I continued shooting until he went under the underpass. It's left in my mind like a wound that heals up, but yet there's some pain left as to what has happened.
The film sequence runs 26 seconds, but in the years afterward, it has gone through thousands of hours of frame-by-frame scrutiny and has been the centerpiece of every official investigation. The Warren Commission relied on it to answer questions about how the shooting happened. The film has also served to fuel many of the conspiracy theories. The Bell and Howell camera is now in the Dallas Museum. A new camera the company gave Zapruder was never used. He told me he could not again put his eye to the viewfinder because it simply rekindled all the images of that awful Friday in November.
Often I'm asked, how did he hold the camera so steady? Which was a question I asked him. He said he was so traumatized by what he had seen, he felt he was just frozen there. And I asked him how many shots he heard. He heard only 2, but he did not refute the findings of the Warren Commission that said there were 3 shots. He said he was so traumatized by it all after he heard the second shot and saw his head blow up that he was gone. Over the years, too, he said that he never wanted a copy of that film because he was afraid early on that people would break into his home wanting a copy of it. It was in such a demand. That piece of film and my original cassette recording of that interview is now part of the permanent archives of the assassination at the 6th Floor Museum in Dallas. So that was really one of the special moments I remember in my career, meeting Abraham Zapruder, and we really bonded. I wanted to take him to dinner that night. He said, no way, no way. I want my wife to meet the boy from New York. So we went back and we shot pool. He showed me the camera, and it was an exciting evening. There were so many stories, and I want to share a couple with you, and talking about the theme of this is civility. As we talk about it, there's no one who was more a victim of incivility than Dr. Martin Luther King. He was a preacher of civility and nonviolence. He knew how to communicate. He was an excellent communicator, how to call for racial equality. And I had the good fortune of meeting him and sitting with him back in 1966 as he picked up a march in Mississippi that was begun by James Meredith, who broke the color barrier at the University of Mississippi. He had been shot, was wounded, could not carry on the march. Dr. King and other leaders of the civil rights movement vowed that they would continue this march against fear to Jackson, Mississippi. And here's part of what my description is of Dr. King.
I had envisioned him as being much taller than he was. He stood just over 5.5 feet. What he lacked in physical height, he exhibited in stature of character. As he interacted with others on the march against fear, I saw a powerful personality who knew just how to electrify and inspire others. He was an engaging man with the ability to articulate his message. He certainly was a wordsmith, as was evident in the reaction he gave me to the shooting of the man who broke the color barrier at the University of Mississippi. It was 3 years after King's I Have a Dream speech, and rednecks often were taunting the marchers. Dr. King soothed tensions with his protestations for peace. His voice echoed above the militant cries for black power by others. I was taken by King's ability to unite people. He told me he was confident the shooting of Meredith and other violence in the South would only strengthen his movement's resolve.
I don't think it is instill more fear. Often people rise to their best in moments like this. Through suffering and violence, people often decide that they are more determined. So I don't think this is going to intimidate Negroes at all. I think it will make them more determined.
I witnessed King's determination firsthand as he stopped to inspire school children. And when he waved into the cotton fields, beckoning, "Come on, children," each person who joined his march represented yet another victory for civil rights.
That was quite an experience. It was my first foray into the Deep South. One of the things that happened, I stayed at the motel called Holiday Inn Junior, and I got to meet the manager's daughter, an 8-year-old impressionable young girl, and she would see me sitting there on breakfast in the morning, and we didn't have computers back then, and she saw me with a typewriter. Remember typewriters? And I was typing away, and she said, "You're a reporter?" I said, "Yeah." And she started asking me questions, where I was from New York, and she's looking at me quizzically. This is the truth. Looking at me quizzically, and "Donna, what? Donna need?" She said, she had the impression that we Yankees had horns. I was glad to belie her myth. Sadly, I was with Dr. King again 2 years after that. It was in Memphis after he was shot and killed, and I was at the funeral home where he was laid out, and Ralph David Abernathy and the other leaders of the civil rights movement stood over his casket, reciting the 23rd Psalm. The struggles of the civil rights movement, they pale in comparison to the struggles of millions of Jews thrown into concentration camps and murdered during World War II. A man who emerged as a voice for the voiceless, a concentration camp survivor who bore witness, was Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel. During an appearance on one of my broadcasts, for him, the first time he ever did this on television, he read a passage from his acclaimed book, Night.
Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp, which has turned my life into one long night, 7 times cursed and 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the little faces of the children, whose bodies I saw turned into wreaths of smoke beneath the silent blue sky. Never shall I forget those flames which consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget that nocturnal silence which deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments which murdered my God and my soul, turned my dreams to dust. Never shall I forget those things even if I'm condemned to live as long as God Himself. Never.
Very powerful and memorable. Things we cannot forget. I have to say, as I'm going here and looking at other videos and talking about civility and incivility, it's how we treat others. They remember us, we remember them. And I have to tell you, in my long career of 50 plus years and 15,000 stories, 30,000 interviews on the street, in the studio, nothing stands out in my mind better than bringing some happiness to American soldiers far from home at Christmas. I had the good fortune to be able to spend 5 Christmases with our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. And along with it, there were local troops. I brought them a taste of New York. Bagels, hot dogs, cheesecake, right to the base. Courtesy DHL, they flew right into the base. And we were looking all for those troops from New York, but once the word got out of the base, boy, we didn't have enough. That cheesecake went fast, and so did the bagels and hot dogs. So I have to say, better than any honors, any trophies, were those moments to bring a smile to the face of a soldier. Take a look.
Hey, Jim, I got for you Dad. I promised him I would give you a hug. Delivering a father's love to his son in Iraq is how our mission began back in 2004. It has since evolved into a huge embrace of hundreds of servicemen and women from our area. Many of them citizen soldiers, our neighbors, dedicated to the defense of freedom, and happy to see a familiar face far from home.
How are you? Good, pleased to meet you, man. Good to see you.
Joy to the world. In this oasis far from the North Pole, Santa's best little helper is carried over his shoulder. The spirit of Christmas fills the air, but the distance from loved ones leaves a void in the heart.
I'm very homesick. I talk to my family on the computer all day.
With the help of DHL Express, we bring these soldiers Christmas trees, a taste of New York with bagels, hot dogs, and cheesecake, and gifts filled with love.
Merry Christmas to you.
A gift from all of us at PIX. Merry Christmas. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men, is a prayer overpowered by the realities of a war.
You hear the sirens right now, and that indicates it's a red alert. That means immediately we get into our helmets and our flak jackets because it's an indication of a possible incoming mortar round.
In less stressful moments, Jill finds ways to divert attention to healthier forms of stress.
On your hands and get ready to push up. 1, 2.
So I wasn't coordinated.
We joined in the lighting of Hanukkah menorahs and the lighting of Christmas trees. But the best present of all we bring is the reunion of families half a world apart.
Hi, Amy. It's your old grandma. I love you. I miss you. And I can't wait for you to get home.
I love you. I miss you. I want you to come home soon. And I can't wait to see you.
I love you too. This means so much. This means so much.
I love you and I really miss you. And I want you to come home. Hi, Daddy. I miss you.
Hi, Lexi. How are you? Merry Christmas.
Birthday.
Umaja!
Are you crying?
I thought I'd be able to get over it, but still brings tears to my eyes. I just want to apologize to New York City for the grown man soldier crying over.
Emotional tears of happiness, a respite from war, a visit from PIX with hometown heroes, a message of love from back home, and a visit from Santa they'll not soon forget.
Who wants to sit on Santa's lap? That was Jill Nicolini, and we brought a lot of happiness to them. I have to tell you, no better feeling, no better award trophy than a soldier putting his hand in mine, or a female soldier giving me a hug and a kiss and say, thank you, you made a difference for my Christmas. And share one other thing back home. I won't forget a couple of years ago when I returned, a woman sees me and shouts out my name as I'm crossing 34th Street. And she said, oh, Marvin Scott, Marvin Scott. I get to the other side of the street. I waited for a moment. She said, oh, she put her arm around me and hugged me. She said, I have to thank you. You made me cry. All right. She got so touched by seeing those soldiers talking to their families live on television from Afghanistan. So those were very special moments. Let me get to some conclusion here. I have to tell you, there are challenging things for a reporter. I've shared some of the stories with you. Probably, I'd say the most challenging part of the job is working the street every day. Working out there and dealing with people who are looking for their 15 seconds of fame. Unfortunately, during my live shot. Oh, they'll come up with expletives and they'll swear at you and they'll make some all kinds of gestures and Ahmad. No, Ahmad. Let me see, please. There she is. There's my poster lady. Oh my goodness. That's the photobomb of photobombs. I was doing a live report from the Department of Education in Lower Manhattan, and I had no idea she was there. And my cameraman didn't even tell me. I got back to the studio, one of the editors took a freeze frame of it and said, "You got to see this." I said, "I'm glad I didn't see it while I was on live." But that is what happens. That's what we have to put up with. And people come over in communities and suddenly they'll surround you. What's he saying? What's he saying? And they'll jump. I was doing a story from Indian Point, and suddenly someone raced behind me, and I couldn't even see what it was. And without missing a beat, I said, "Well, you never know who's going to show up during live television." I continue with my report. So those are some of the challenges. The thesis of this whole talk was about civility in civility. So in conclusion of this discourse, I have to say we all understand the problem. And now it's important for us to find a common ground to ease our civility crisis. You know, consider the words of President Kennedy. This is something he said in his inaugural address. "So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Let both sides explore what problems unite us instead of belaboring those problems that divide us." JFK's admonition of over half a century ago is also relevant to our current political debates. As a society, we can be mindful of how we treat each other and work to create an environment that fosters the common good. And I think it's a lesson to be learned just from those very eloquent and articulate words of John F. Kennedy. For me, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. I've been talking for the last half hour. Now I'm glad to hear from you if you have any questions. Thank you. I hope you all enjoy the book. It's been an exciting journey, and I hope you enjoy it. My journey as much as I enjoyed writing it and living it. So anyone have any questions? I see a hand. Shoot. Go ahead.
Yeah, on that last stand-up that you did, come in closer and done a B-roll so that it wouldn't have been in viewers' conscious mind?
I wasn't behind the camera. Yeah, you know something? Yeah, it's a very good point, because some cameramen would have done that. Yeah, I don't know if he saw it at the last minute. I was in the wrap-up portion of my report. But, yeah, common sense would have said, all right, move in tighter. I agree with you. If I was behind the camera, that's what I would have done. But it's up to the camera. He's running it. You got a question over here?
Like you, I'm always, I never cease to be amazed by how many people who have been successful in life come from the Bronx. So I'm curious where you spent your formative years and what schools you attended.
Well, my role model was another Bronxite who we lost this past year, Gabe Pressman, and he was a legend. He was bigger than life, and he was my role model. I remember running into Gabe Pressman. He grew up in the Bronx, and when I was attending New York University, and I see him running around covering fires and covering all kinds of political stories, and I said, someday. That was my dream, and the someday came in the 70s when actually Gabe was a colleague. We both worked at Channel 5. Most of his career was at WNBC, Channel 4, but he had a few years, he worked at Channel 5 when I was there, and it was such an honor to work with Gabe. He was a mentor, and he was a role model, an inspiration to so many young people who wanted to be reporters. My time in the Bronx, well, I talk about it, I think, in the book. As you'll see, my career literally got ignited by a fire. I was 14 years old, and one night I heard the fire engines going by. I was watching the Steve Allen show. Remember Steve Allen? You know, those days before Merv Griffin and all the others, and Johnny Carson. And so I raced to the window, and night had turned to day, and I raced, picked up my camera. That was my hobby at the time. I had a passion for photography. I dashed out, and people who didn't hear the fire engines, they heard my feet dashing down 4 floors from my apartment building. I got there before the firefighters were even set up, and I got this fabulous photo of flames belching from a dozen windows of this catering hall, and the hose wasn't even fully functional. But it was a great picture. And the Daily News at that time was New York's picture newspaper. And they bought pictures. They bought mine. They said, "Come on down, kid." And right away, they gave me a $2 messenger fee, which wasn't bad to supplement my $1 a week allowance. But even better than that, the next day, there was my photo, a quarter of the center fold with a credit line, and followed by a $25 check. But the best part of it, what really got me going, when I returned to my apartment building, all my neighbors were standing on the corner of Mount Eden and Townsend Avenue. I don't know where you were from the Bronx, but that was the West Bronx down from Lebanon Hospital. Anyway, they're all standing in the corner and say, "What happened? What happened?" I told them. So you could say that was my very first newscast at the age of 14. And I pursued it. I pursued with my photography. About a year later, I was 15, I worked my way into an opening night of the circus for a benefit for the Leukemia Society. Marilyn Monroe was making her first public appearance after her divorce from Joe DiMaggio. And of course, she was America's sex symbol, so I wanted to get there. So I worked my way into it with my high school press pass. I brought my best friend with me. We both got credentials to go to the circus. We walked in with all the paparazzi, and we walked in like we belonged. And there we were with the paparazzi taking pictures of Marilyn Monroe. It was a moment. And at one moment, she was riding an elephant into the center ring. That was the highlight of it all. But before she mounted the elephant, she was posing for pictures. And at one point, she's walking towards us. And I hear this voice, "Is this all right?" I turn around. She was talking to me. A 15-year-old with raging hormones. Oh, my God. Yes, Miss Monroe. 8 iconic photographs out of the dozen pictures I took. It really captured the magnificence of Marilyn Monroe. And recently I've sold several at auction at Bonham and Butterfield. So they are iconic photos. So that's my background in the Bronx, a little long telling you the story of how it all began, but that's how it began, and I pursued. It was a dream. It was a dream to be a reporter. You know, I took pictures, then when I got into high school and college, I said, well, let me see if I could write as well. And so I coupled the writing with the photography and pursued a career. And my first job was in Charleston, West Virginia. Then I moved on to Columbus, Ohio, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Got back to New York in 1963, just before the assassination. And I've been in New York ever since. So I have to say I am blessed. I am truly blessed because I'm still doing today what I wanted to do as a kid growing up in the Bronx. Question?
Marvin, this is a tough one. You were depicted here with, I think, Walter Cronkite. You just mentioned Gabe Pressman. I'm sure you knew Huntley, Brinkley, Jim Jensen, and all
the icons.
Would you just comment on reporting today versus reporting then? I know it's a tough question.
That is a good question. It has changed. The media, it is so competitive. First of all, back then, you had maybe a dozen channels. You had 3 networks. Today, you have 800 channels. You have the cable networks, and you have such competition. And you get into the thing I hear about so much these days about the fake news. And so what has changed is the multiplicity of venues where you can get your news today. And you don't know, you'll hear one story on one channel, You'll hear a different story on another channel, and you don't know which one is correct. It is put more onus on reporters to really be succinct and accurate. What has happened today is, because of the pressure, we do not have the same checks and balances they had when I started. The editorial control. Nothing could get on the air until it went through an editor. Today, in the rush to get it on the air, it doesn't always get through that editor, and hence you get your errors, your mistakes. I am saddened to see that some of the things that have happened with some people who I had great respect for. Brian Ross, for example, on ABC, an excellent reporter, investigative reporter who has deserved and won many awards. But he has failed on some stories, and he is suffering the consequences. He's been suspended. It has happened at CNN. 3 employees were fired because they did not vet their stories. The problem today is there's not enough of that vetting process. We have to, I was taught every story has to have 2 sources. You need 2 sources to verify it. More than that's even better. I've gone with stories. There's only one time, I have to admit, that I went with one source. I had one source, but it was such an unimpeachable source, but I wasn't allowed to go on the air because I didn't have a second source. It was the night we got bin Laden, and I knew we got him before it was really announced. I'll share that story with you. It was a Sunday night. About 6:30, 7 o'clock, the White House announced that the president would have an announcement of national security. And everyone started speculating what it was. Word was out that it had something to do with bin Laden. I started calling my sources in Washington, one in particular, who has become a friend over the years and was always reliable. And he was in a position to know exactly what was going on. I called him. He said, I can't tell you anything, so I'll be talking with the White House in a while. You want to call me back? I called back, still hasn't had a conversation. And then around 10:30 that Sunday night, I called him again. And he had just gotten off the phone, not with the White House, but with the president. He was one of few people, because of his position, one of few people who was talking directly to the president. And I asked repeatedly, have we killed bin Laden? Have we got bin Laden in? Because no one had broken this yet. And he said, Marvin, please. And I said, look, I respect you. I respect you, but all right, I won't press you anymore, but tell me, am I right or wrong? I phrased it, I said, just tell me, am I right? Pause. Pause. Yes, but you didn't hear it from me. And my producer, news director, would not let me go on the air and say it. I knew it was true. And it was 20 minutes later, CNN, I believe John King on CNN, broke the news that Navy SEAL 9 had gotten bin Laden. It was very frustrating, and I had a nice tete-a-tete with my boss the next morning about it. It would have been a nice exclusive for a local station to break. But the answer to your question, it's changed because it is so competitive, and because the bean counters are there, Bob. The bean counters are there who have cut back on the editors. We've lost 100 newspapers in the last 10 to 15 years. And that was another source. People can't rely, and you can't take things at face value. You've got to explore it. We got into the discussion about news. You hear Fox, you hear CNN and MSNBC. People say, oh, but you know something? People gravitate to the station that replicates their own political feelings. You like something on the right, you go to Fox. You want something on the left, you go to MSNBC. My suggestion, take a half hour of Fox, a half hour of MSNBC, and then make your own decision. Walter Cronkite said to me many years ago, evening newscasts are nothing more than a headline news service. Part of it's your responsibility. Read. But sadly, we've lost those magazines. We've lost Newsweek. They're online. We can't take things just by what we say. When I do a report, I'm given 2 minutes. You think I can get all the facts in there? I tell the story as best I can in 2 minutes. This reporting the other night, Mayor de Blasio's State of the City address went for over an hour. I had 2 minutes to tell the story. So how much can I get out of it? You've got to pick up a paper for more details. Yeah, we've lost some of that objectivity that is there. I think we strive to be objective. I still say that this is an honorable profession that we're in, that I am in. And the bulk of reporters are honest at their job. They don't want to taint the stories. In my 50 years in the business, I have never been told to slant a story one way or another, though I did read recently that there was a reporter who worked for years at Fox, and he was told to slant his story. He said he refused. He stayed there for 5 years. I have never, only once someone wanted a little more attitude. I think they were saying a little more opinion, but I never gave it to them because I'm a storyteller, not a commentator. And that's the way I want to be remembered, as a storyteller, as I said in that video that the broadcasters of New York had published. Yes?
There are many more women on television today and on radio. Is this a plus for the industry?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are so many talented women out there. And I have to tell you, the one who I love, I don't know how many of you up here in Connecticut watch Channel 11, but Kaidi Tong. Kaidi is legendary, and of all the people I've worked in my career, she's exactly what you see is what she is. She is just wonderful. There are so many excellent female reporters out there who deserve positions. They were held back for so many years. Many years ago, about 20 years ago, I wrote a story for Parade magazine about women who were in the news business. Meredith Vieira is a dear friend, and she was out there. There are so many people out there today. Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes, a seasoned journalist. Yes, I think overall, your question, across the board, not only in the news business, but overall, women are there and they're getting their place that they rightfully deserve. Anyone else? I hope you all got a book. Hope you enjoyed reading it. Thank you all. Thank you.